Wow. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, I'm so excited to see all of you here joining us together from all around the world, really. Thank you so much, and greetings to all of you. I'm June Rawl, the director for Florida IP Day, and I'm so happy that all of you are joining us together with Dr. Ramin Yazdampana, who will be presenting our webinar today titled Learning English as an Adult: Myths, Facts, and Competencies. In this webinar today, Ramin will address typical questions and debunk common myths about adult English language learning. He will also present a growth mindset protocol for learner persistence and discuss a framework of communicative competence that leverages the funds of knowledge students bring into the classroom. I'm really excited about this webinar today, Ramin, as all of them. But before we get started, I do want to remind you of a few housekeeping reminders. The webinar today is recorded and it is archived on the IP Day website. Give us about 48 hours and you'll see it on the IP Day website. I hope that you share it and leverage out all the great materials that Dr. Yazdampana is going to present today. If you have questions, I hope you do have some questions and some comments throughout the presentation. Please type them in the Q&A option, and Ramin will look at those, and I'll be monitoring them throughout the presentation as well. Your microphones are muted. You are in listen-only mode. So I hope you enjoy the webinar today, and I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Yazdampana now for an overview of today's webinar. Ramin?
Wow, thank you so much for that introduction, June. And as always, thanks to the IP Day team for just all your wonderful support and collaboration. And just hello to everybody who is in attendance today. Thank you for making the time to be here to just engage in your own professional development and share that with others, your colleagues, your students, your communities. So I applaud you for being here. So let me just click over here to our overview. And as you see here, this is going to be a bit of a trip, of a little journey. And we'll start with a poll just to kind of activate our schema, our understanding and background knowledge of the topic. We're going to get into a bit of a discussion about critical period hypothesis, what that is, and how does that apply to our discussion here today, as well as share some more current research on the topic. Also going to explore a bit about growth mindset, plus stress can be enhancing mindset. So you might have heard of growth mindset, but maybe not the combination of the two, which is this kind of synergistic mindset. And I'm going to guide us in a bit of a protocol that is a very simple protocol that I think is very useful. The research shows is very useful, so it must be very useful, but we can apply it in our own context and be the judge of that as well. Introduce a little bit about kind of systems and processes for learning and habit formation, and then dive into funds of knowledge, a bit of explanation of what that is, how that's relevant, especially for adult learners, and how that can be applied into aligning competencies with instruction. And then leave some room here for Q&A at the end. As June mentioned, we'll be monitoring the chat. So please engage in the chat. Ask questions, bring up topics. This is what we're here for. We're here as a community of professionals in adult education and adult ESOL with this topic. So please share any resources, ideas, questions, anything that you have is appreciated by me and I'm sure everyone else that's present here today. Okay, so first we'll start with a little poll here, and let me launch the poll. So just give me a second. Let me see here. Let me go to polls. All right. So the first poll I'm going to launch here. And you should be seeing the poll right now. So let's just take a second to answer this. So our ability to learn stops at a certain age. So we have a lot of participation here. Thank you. It looks like overwhelmingly 100. Whoa, okay, all right. So we have some agree, we have some disagree of our ability to learn stops at a certain age. I'm not including death here. So that's past life, but our ability to learn stops at a certain age. Agree or disagree. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll now. And I'm going to share results. So we see here that 95% of us disagree with this, that our ability to learn stops at a certain age. We do not agree with that. And 5% saying, okay, maybe it does. All right, fair enough. Okay, so let's see here. So let me go to the next poll, since we're having so much fun here with polls. Let's see, polls. All right, I'm going to launch the second poll. All right, this one's similar, but a little different. This one is, let me see, let me just make sure it's launching here. Let me end this one first. Okay, all right, let me go back. Poll 2, launch. Okay, here we go, finally, all right. So our ability to learn slows at a certain age. So this one isn't stops, but our ability to learn slows at a certain age. So do you agree or disagree with this? So if you would just take a second to click agree or disagree.
Ramin, do you mind launching the poll again? It's not appearing on the screen.
Okay, let me try it again here. Let me see. Okay, I'll try again. Let me see here. Relaunch poll. Okay, let me try it again. All right, do you see it now?
Yes,
Yeah,
we see it.
yes, you see it again.
Thank
All
you.
right. So you can see that maybe my ability to launch a poll slows at a certain age, but there's our ability to learn, and we'll just keep that general here. Our ability to learn slows at a certain age. And we have a lot more here. Okay, so I'm going to launch here. I'm going to end the poll and share results. Okay, so we see here that this one is more of an agree. 72% agree that yes, our ability to learn slows at a certain age, where 28% disagree. Okay, so all right. Okay, thank you all for participating in that poll. So I think we all agree that our ability to learn, we disagree, that our ability to learn stops at a certain age, but maybe we're not so sure about our ability to learn slows at a certain age. And I think that's because there is some truth to that, but it might not be for the reasons that people might think, right? So we're going to discuss that here in a bit. And as experts in adult education, and in this case, in ESOL, I think it's going to be important for us to kind of get some clarity around this so that we can articulate that to the community, the general public, our colleagues, and most importantly, to our students. Okay, so we have here the critical period hypothesis. And if you could in the chat, just let me know yes or no if you've heard about the critical period hypothesis, sometimes called the critical age hypothesis. So just a yes or no in the chat would be appreciated, or I have or haven't. So yeah, go ahead there. Okay, great. So we have some yeses, some nos. Fantastic. Yeah, and you can just use the chat here. You don't have to use the Q&A, but you can just use the chat for this one. Okay, great. So we have a good mix here. All right, thank you. So if we have heard it, this might be a good review. If you haven't heard it, this is what it is. So this is a hypothesis made by these researchers, Lenenberg and Penfield and Roberts, which basically states that as adults, we can't learn languages as easily or as proficiently as children, right? And this becomes increasingly the case with age. This was actually with language learning specifically. This was referred to as the frozen, not the frozen brine, the frozen brain hypothesis. So this was actually said, okay, as we get older, we can't process things. Our brains become frozen, maybe become fossilized in some kind of way. So it also states that there's a critical period for native-like competence. And so this is saying that basically, you know, to have a high proficiency in a language, to be highly communicative, that you have to learn a language at a certain period, right? And this is from early childhood to adolescence. So adolescence being, you know, around 18, 19 years old. So in order to really learn a language in a native-like way, you have to start early, right? And you have to do that before adolescence, or else good luck, okay? That at that time, they were saying it's really not possible. This is what the research was saying at the time. And they were basing this off of assumptions that children's cortex is more plastic, right, than that of adult learners. And so this is saying that, you know, referring to plastic is this term plasticity or neuroplasticity. And this is basically our brain's ability to change with learning, okay, just learning in general. So plasticity is the brain's ability to kind of reorganize neural pathways throughout one's life as a result of experience. And so I'd like to actually play for you a really, I think, a video that illustrates what neuroplasticity is. And when you get the PDF of this presentation, you actually can click on this link and it should take you to these different hyperlinks. So let's check out this video here on neuroplasticity and learning explained.
Neuroscience is a biological science that is concerned with the function of the brain and the nervous system. For many years, scientists thought that the brain was fixed and couldn't adapt or change after childhood. But advances in fMRI scanning have shown that this could not be further from the truth. We can now see that our brains change and adapt every day, regardless of our age. Every time we learn something new, we're harnessing the power of neuroplasticity. Neuroscientists believe we have over 100 billion neurons in our brain, each capable of connecting to tens of thousands of others. Neurons are the building blocks of the brain, and each one can make trillions of connections every second. When we learn a new skill or think about something differently, we begin to make new connections between neurons. Every time we practice a new skill, think in a certain way, or feel a specific emotion, those related connections are then strengthened, and it becomes easier for our brains to follow this pathway. If we keep using this pathway, our brains begin to adapt, and this new way of thinking, feeling, or doing becomes second nature. The less we use our old pathways, the weaker that pathway becomes. It's this ability to make new connections that has enabled scientists to coin the term neuroplasticity, meaning our brains are pliable and plastic and can grow, adapt, and change. When we apply the neuroscience of learning with how the brain works, we can modify 4 variables to maximize the retainment of knowledge. These can be summarized as AGEs: attention, generation, emotion, and spacing. Attention. For us to be able to learn something, we need to pay attention to it. If we can't minimize distractions, then we can't focus on the learning and we won't remember it. Generation. This is where we encourage the learner to generate meaningful connections and associations with what they already know or a skill they already have. Help the learner to make those connections to previous learning and the wider context, and this includes the learner reflecting on their own learning process. Emotion. If we can attach emotion to the learning and help to motivate the learner with the rewards that they're going to gain from it, or challenge them to get out of their comfort zone, they're much more likely to remember the information later on. Spacing. Spacing out the learning over time and using repetition and retrieval instead of chunking it into one big block will strengthen the learning and help to move it from short-term memory to long-term memory. With the trend for more courses moving towards endpoint assessment, this skill will be key in the
Okay, so I like this video because one of the way it illustrates neuroplasticity and it explains that. I also like this AGES learning model. We're going to kind of discuss similar points that this gentleman describes in this video, maybe with different terminology. But I think a lot of the concepts that he shares in this acronym here of AGES is pretty spot on, and we'll come back to some of the points that he mentions. But that is basically neuroplasticity in a nutshell. So research, current contemporary research, especially around second language learning, actually consistently shows that adolescents and adults perform better than children, and actually shows that given the same amount of time as children to learn a language, the top quarter of learners from the over 20 group, right? So that past adolescence, do just as well as the average of those who started before 10. So the issue, therefore, is not a matter of age, but rather reflects social situational factors, not biological. So, for example, children generally have fewer distractions and more time for focused and immersive study than adults, right? If you start studying a language at the age of 5, you're not sitting down with a book and explicitly learning that language, for an hour a day. You're more immersed in the classroom environment. You're more immersed in the social environment. You're engaging with the language much more than, for example, our adults, right? Many of our adult language learners don't have that same option, that same possibility, opportunity is the word I'm looking for, to be an immersive, kind of intensive environment. Of course, that if you're in an intensive English program, for example, you might have that opportunity, but the majority of our learners don't have that opportunity. So it's highly possible that this learning difference by age is then not due to some change in brain plasticity or the ability of the cortex to continue to learn, but it's that it's just harder, right, for older learners that to just access and spend and commit the same amount of time to learning, in this case to learning English, as children do. So additionally, I want to say that the expectations that we have of children's constructions of language, both in academic and social context, are often shorter and simpler, with simpler vocabulary, right? Higher frequency vocabulary, and with fewer language demands. Okay, so as a language learner myself, whose favorite conversation partner is an 8-year-old, I appreciate this fact that I can, when I'm engaging in Turkish with this 8-year-old, things are a little bit more simplified, right? This person actually has more empathy for me as a language learner, and we're able to engage in a kind of simpler way. This person is not asking me to explain, my political, perspectives on things. We're just talking about animals. So that also has an impact on learning as well. I'd also like to introduce you to this research study, and this research paper. It's been out actually for a little bit now, since 2018. But this paper is called A Critical Period for Second Language Acquisition. evidence from 2/3 of a million English speakers. And they actually had almost 700,000 participants take this 10-minute online quiz. It's called Which English? And I'm going to show you here, if when you click that, it'll take you to, you can actually take this quiz yourself. I took this quiz. So they took this 10-minute quiz. It was engaging. It was really looking at different grammatical, understanding the grammaticality of these different sentences. So at the end, it's able to generate, kind of guesstimate where you're from, where if you're an American English speaker, if you're a British English speaker, if you're an Indian English speaker, and then through this way, it's collecting data for this research project. So we're basically looking at two questions here. One is, how does learning ability change with age? And how proficient can someone be if they begin learning at a particular age, right? So if you begin learning at the age of 5 versus age of 10 versus the age of 19 versus the age of, past adolescence. So just to mention, it's always good to have a little bit of a critical eye when we're reading research. Some of the limitations that I saw of this particular study was, one, it was self-reporting. Right? There was this kind of like online quiz. It's getting people to kind of, trust people and accurately reporting their experience with learning, in this case, English. Also, it tested for grammatical competence and not communicative competence. So that's also important to kind of keep in mind. And it's not really clear how many hours of English language study or what kind of English language study that they engaged in. So this study does have limitations. With that said, it also has some interesting findings. And two of the major findings can be summarized as the following. One, the earlier you can begin learning another language, the better. Okay, great. That seems pretty common sense. But what might not be so common sense is that many adults actually achieved native-like performance, meaning that they scored in a range that was actually comparable to some takers of the quiz that were actually that self-reported that they were native speakers of English. So if we see this graph here, so this is from the same study, and this chart compares this. What we see here, it's this graph here, is comparing the performance of the top quartile of over 20, the age of over 20 learners, and so we see that here in blue. With students who started learning English before the age of 5, so we see that here in red. Before the age of 10, we see that in yellow, and before the age of 20, okay, and we see that here in green. All right, so hopefully your eyes aren't glossing over when you're seeing, this this data here, but I'll try to kind of break it down for you. So again, if we see here, this is the accuracy. So this is above 90%. This is around 80%. And we see the years of study, okay? So again, this is the years of study starting at these different age groups. So again, the blue here is starting over the age of 20. Again, in red, starting at the age of 5. In yellow, the age of 10, and in green, before the age of 20. Now, if we see here, thousands of adults who started learning after 20 years old scored in a native level range on this quiz, right? So if we just look here at this kind of blue here, we can kind of follow how they actually, after about 10 years of study, starting after the age of 20, how they are scoring above 90%. We can also see here that after just that 1 year of study, okay, how well they do, right? And that's actually 85% quartile. So basically, given we can see that even after this year of studying, that these participants that took this actually did quite well, right? And so I hope that shows that even within a year of study, even starting after the age of 20, our language proficiency can actually, get to a fairly strong level, to where we can at least kind of, on this kind of quiz, again, this is testing grammatical competence. But I think that we've seen, even with learners, I know learners that I've worked with within a year, those who can commit to the time and the effort, make pretty big gains, right, in their language. It might not be native-like proficiency, and this research also shows here, we can see it takes about 10 years to kind of reach that more native-like proficiency. But I can attest to, as an educator, working with students who, again, can commit the time, the energy, who are very motivated, can, get to that high level of communicative competence to succeed academically and professionally. So, the data shows it, the research shows that yes, adult learners can learn language, past adolescence, right, past their 20s, if they are able to put in the time and the effort. It has nothing to do with, neuroplasticity or biological kind of factors or the brain slowing down. It has nothing to do with that. And it has everything to do with social factors and, really just kind of the opportunities that learners have, as well as the, I would say, the mindset to understand that learning is possible. Okay, all right. So I'm just looking at the chat here. I see Anna brings up a great point. Anna says, the only thing that age is known to affect is pronunciation. Puberty does affect pronunciation. The reason for that are still unknown. Thank you, Anna, for bringing that up. I knew someone was going to bring that up, and I'm glad that you did. So that's true. There are, depending on the languages, yes, language is such a physical action. And so we do develop a capacity, or, muscular capacity, or ability to kind of shape and say sounds, our ability to hear certain sounds, right? Those minimal pair activities show that. But a lot of this also has to do also with social cultural factors as well, right? So the older we get, we also form a kind of a language ego. And it can be almost like fraudulent. We feel that we're kind of an imposter syndrome, where when we sound different, when we take too much of an accent or a pronunciation that is too distant from our first language, that can prevent us from kind of acting and developing our ability to pronounce things in that target language. So that's an aspect of it as well. So I don't think it has to do all with biological factors. I think it also has to do with kind of social factors as well. One great example is you see actors' ability to learn accents and to learn to sound kind of native-like in a relatively short amount of time. Okay, so some more. So pronunciation can be maybe can be the exception with that. I always like to say that clarity of communication, clarity of pronunciation, not accent, is the focus. I like to remind my teacher colleagues about that. I like to remind my students about that. There are so many advantages of having. First of all, we all have an accent. Right, and there's so many advantages of having an accent that might sound different, and from the norm. It's really kind of a badge of honor, I would say, to have an accent, because that just is displaying your courage, your ability to learn, another language. Okay, so let's move on here. Okay, and just very quickly, this is just showing the range of people of languages the range of people who speak these different languages. There's their first language, their native language, and this is really addressing the myth that, or the saying, the belief that it's common to say that, oh, a certain language is harder to learn if you're coming from a certain language group. But this data actually showed that these might not be completely true. Of course, writing systems can differ greatly between languages. But in this study, they found that there was actually little difference in the learning speeds or the ultimate attainment of learning English coming from these different linguistic backgrounds. And this is from the article. It says, what is remarkable about language is that we are nearly all extremely good at it, right? Including, okay, and I'm going to move this over here, including adult learners. And I would say, especially adult learners. Again, I would push back on this, even this, this kind of like indirect, belief that adults are lesser than. I would say that actually, in my experience, in many ways, adults bring our own strengths to the language learning process that are unique and different to those of children, right? Okay. All right, so a couple of links here. Of course, we're not going to go through all of them, but one of these intentions of these webinars for me is to provide you with resources to do a deeper dive, to explore more. And I try to provide resources to you that are really interesting. And these resources, I think you will find very interesting. So given the challenges that learning anything, right, to an expert level, especially for adults who have less time for immersive study, knowing how to manage, right? How to manage that time, how to manage the challenges, how to manage the stress, okay, of learning is really key. It's key to sustaining motivation to persist in the learning process. And as adult educators, we all know that persistence, in coming to class and attendance and learning and learning outside of class, this is one of the biggest challenges we and our students face. So this is where these recent research studies that I present here on the slide really show how important establishing a growth mindset is to students. So we're going to look at two things. Growth plus stress can be enhancing mindsets. So, of course, a growth mindset is what we've been talking about, right? Understanding that we have the capacity to learn forever, right? Lifelong learning. And the second part of that is this stress can be enhancing mindset. So I just want to share with you really quickly this website here. This is from the University of Texas, Austin, I believe. And this was a paper. This is David Yeager, who is a psychology professor. And this is a paper that was published relatively recently in Nature, okay, in the journal Nature. So said here that in a new paper published in Nature, Associate Professor David Yeager outlines a synergistic mindset study that protects adolescents from unhealthy responses to stress. And I think that this is also appropriate for adults. Okay, so this protocol was this online tool that is a 30-minute self-administered online training that has been shown to protect adolescents from unhealthy responses to stress and the related mental health consequences. So this was in response at the time to COVID, but it's been applied post-COVID just for students who are in stressful situations, right? Which is often true for university students and is often true for adult learners. So let me give you a little background here. So adolescents today, right, as we know, as well as adults, just all learners really are experiencing kind of high levels of stress-related anxiety, even feelings of sadness or depression. So the conventional guidance to avoid stressful situations can be, of course, disadvantageous, right, to learning and just to life in general, as it leads many teenagers to disengage from potentially beneficial stressors, such as demanding academic coursework. So that's really key there, right? Disengaging from potentially beneficial stressors, such as demanding academic coursework. So it's not trying to avoid stress, it's trying to understand and compartmentalize stress to the benefit, right, of our growth. All right, so to fulfill the need for tools to help adolescents engage positively with stressors, researchers designed the synergistic mindset intervention to simultaneously target two sets of attitudes or beliefs, a growth mindset and a stress can be enhancing mindset. The growth mindset centers on the belief that intellectual, athletic, or other abilities can be developed with effort and support from others, inspiring adolescents to think of difficult challenges as opportunities for self-improvement. I'm gonna highlight that again, okay? Inspiring people, I'm gonna say here, to think of difficult challenges as opportunities for self-improvement. That's growth mindset. The stress can be enhancing mindset encourages people to view physiological stress responses such as sweaty palms, a racing heart, deeper breathing as helpful because they mobilize energy and deliver oxygenated blood to the brain and tissues. Okay, so this is any one of us here who is a performer. All right, whether you're delivering a presentation, whether you're performing a concert, whether you're about to step into any kind of performance, right? Athletic performance. This is definitely true when we're asking our students to communicate, participate in class, right? To speak English, to answer a question, to present on something, to express their ideas in class. Outside of class, that's definitely the case. So it's understanding that these stress responsors, these physiological stress responsors, are not a negative. They're there to actually boost our ability to engage. Right? It delivers oxygenated blood to the brain and to the tissues to increase performance. So if we can understand that physiological process and be okay with it, we're able to leverage that, right? It's almost like a natural kind of steroid or performance booster. So the results here, the researchers conducted 6 related studies to assess the effects of the synergistic mindset intervention on the stress experienced by high schoolers and undergraduate college students. So I'm just gonna go down here. Following the synergistic mindset intervention, study participants reported less negative views of stressful academic events and the responses to those stressors. The intervention also improved cardiovascular responses to a stress test and reduced levels of cortisol, a hormone produced in response to stress. Furthermore, the findings suggest that the intervention improved participants' psychological well-being and academic success and reduced anxiety, all right, during the 2020 COVID-19 university closures. And this research has continued post-COVID. Analyses indicated that the combination of the two mindsets is more powerful than either of the component mindsets alone. Overall, the intervention's effects were greatest for participants who had negative mindsets prior to completing the online module. However, some benefits, including lowering cortisol levels and improving academic achievement, were apparent, irrespective, okay? So, last thing here, significance. Our studies suggest that we might not teach adolescents that they are too fragile to overcome difficult struggles, but we might instead provide them with resources and guidance they need to unleash their skills and creativity in addressing challenges and addressing big problems. They note that the synergistic mindset intervention could, in principle, be scaled nationally at low cost to help reduce stress. Okay. I usually don't read out things verbatim like this, but I think that this was so well put. I think it's such an important study and resource that that it's worth kind of sharing here. Let me just jump over to the chat here. I see some help, some support here from Amanda. Thank you, Amanda. I'll put this link here as well. Again, all of these links are clickable in the PDF that's going to be posted by IPDAY. after this webinar. Okay, so some other links here as well. I really recommend this Applying a Growth Mindset by Andrew Huberman. I almost said my good friend because I listen to Professor Huberman all the time, his podcasts, and I really, really highly suggest listening to this podcast, Applying a Growth Mindset. Okay, so this is it. This is the protocol that we just learned about. This is the Synergistic Mindset Protocol. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of guide you through it, right? And this is something that again, you can easily do with your students. So the first kind of starts with almost like a mindset kind of activity, right? Or a mindfulness activity. And it just gets students to reflect and recall a time. And let me ask you, right? Let's reflect and recall a time when you experience stress while learning something new. So what's the first thing that comes to mind as you kind of like think about that, right? Let me think about that. Okay, all right. So we're thinking about that. We can share that in class. This is just a primer kind of activity to kind of get out that, put it all on the table that, yes, learning can be stressful. Okay, great. All right. Now, the second step is providing a rationale by discussing neuroplasticity. It can be as simple as just showing that same video, right, that I showed you, and just understanding this idea of neuroplasticity, of how our brain learns, and our capacity to continue learning no matter who we are, no matter what our gender is, no matter where we come from, no matter anything, okay? We all have this ability to learn and to learn forever. The third step in this protocol is to reframe. So reframe by explaining how stress is natural and stress is actually necessary, right? So this is important to discuss, especially with our adult ESOL students. It's just saying, hey, when you feel, your heart beating, your sweaty palms, that's okay, right? This is our body's response to this performance, okay? And it's totally natural. There's nothing wrong with you. This is something that we can just maybe take a deep breath and we can kind of get used to, right? And this is actually sending blood to our brain. It's oxygenating our system so that we can think more in a more focused way, in a clearer way, and we can try our best. Now, of course, we want to create an environment in our classrooms that's safe, that where learners are encouraged, right? And praised, I would even say, for taking chances, for making mistakes. All right, I call them beautiful mistakes, and I thank students for making them, and I do that really intentionally and explicitly to kind of reverse this psychology that we often have around apologizing and feeling bad and trying to avoid mistakes. I think that's one, with older learners. That can be especially difficult, especially if we've gone through educational experiences that have punished us from taking chances, from taking, from trying things out, for making mistakes, for making errors, for being punished for them. So this is really something that we have to discuss, especially with our adult learners. One, because they can have the capacity to kind of think about it in that kind of way. But really take time daily, weekly to reframe how we think about stress and really how we think about, making mistakes. And then finally, praise the process. Okay, and this is where we are praising students for showing up, right, to class. We are praising them for turning in their assignments. We're praising them for doing language logs, journals, just putting in the effort. So again, this is kind of a reframe of not so much praising the performance, okay, but praising the process. Because if we can get learners to fall in love with the process by providing them with positive reinforcement of the process, we can start to minimize the importance of performance, which can be difficult, especially at the beginning stages of language learning, as well as the latter stages of language learning, where we start to plateau in our performance. So really focusing on the process, establishing a system, and then praising and reinforcing that process, right? And understanding that making errors, making mistakes, failing, learning from those mistakes, and trying again is the process, especially with language learning. All right, so I'm not gonna go too much into this. I did provide, again, these are all live links. But speaking of habits and establishing systems, I think this resource can really be helpful. This is something I mentioned before in previous webinars. It's just something that should really be on every person's bookshelf or Kindle library. And this is called Atomic Habits. And so I just want to pull out 3 quotes from that video, and I'll read them out loud. So one is, a slight change in your daily habits can guide your life to a very different destination, right? So just doing something, and atomic meaning very small, but consistently, can actually build up to very big shifts in whatever we're trying to attain, whether that be learning a language, whether that be a different mindset. This is where that neuroplasticity discussion comes into where we're building these synapses, right? We're building these neural pathways so that our brain, this is how our brain learns, okay? It's not fixed, it's not frozen. We can create new neural pathways, and we can strengthen them, and we can actually weaken old ones. So that can be maybe the mindset that we can't learn, right? The second is, success is the product of daily habits, not once in lifetime transformations. Again, this is focusing on the process. And finally, goals are good for setting a direction, but systems are best for making progress. All right, so goals are good, but we have to get beyond setting goals. We also have to then figure out a system for achieving those goals. All right, those can be study plans, learner plans that we co-create with students, keeping portfolios, right? Keeping consistent, doing consistent classroom routines and out of class routines. This link here is teachers helping learners to develop learner autonomy. That's another webinar. It's a link to a webinar that I did. You can explore some more ideas by clicking there. Okay, so getting here to our final slides is this discussion of really what I think makes adults some of the strongest learners and some of the strongest language learners. And that's this idea of funds of knowledge, right? The funds of knowledge that adult learners bring with them. So the funds of knowledge is, according to the Funds of Knowledge Toolkit, is the historical accumulation of abilities, bodies of knowledge, assets, and cultural ways of interacting that adults learners bring with them. So commonly held assumptions based on deficit thinking state that adult English language learners lack, right? Lack in culture, lack in the target culture, lack in the target language, and maybe even lack in motivation, right? And interest in learning. This deficit thinking ideology also, presents kind of low ambition, low self-esteem, low emotional stability, and a lack of discipline, right? As sources of illiteracy. A different way to think about this with adult literacy envisions learners from an asset-based perspective, right? It's kind of debunking and going against this deficit ideology. So a funds of knowledge approach to adult learning and teaching employs culturally relevant processes to enhance the life and work trajectories of learners, disrupting deficit perspectives that envision learners as lacking, right? So instructors shift attention to what learners bring with them to the education process and intentionally co-construct knowledge with learners. So a funds of knowledge approach really requires initially looking at what learners can do as a whole person. Okay, what are their histories? What are their identities? What are their learning experiences? What are their attitudes and values? Just learning, spending time with our learners, engaging learners to kind of elicit, right, these funds of knowledge to learn about our learners, whether that's through a needs analysis at the beginning of a course and weekly kind of journals and discussions with learners throughout the course. So, if you'd like to learn a little bit more about funds of knowledge, there's some links down here. Again, this is a webinar I did on funds of knowledge, tapping into the funds of knowledge of our adult ESOL learners. So this brings us to aligning students' assets, right? Students' funds of knowledge and goals with curriculum, right? And learning activities that really develop communicative language competencies across the board. So this table here, right, we can see some of the English language proficiency standards, and I got those from the good people at the Florida Department of Education. This is where you can find the updated 2023-24, as well as subsequent updates for curriculum frameworks, right? And this is where I'm pulling this from, the Adult English for Speakers of Other Languages. I'll go ahead and copy and paste this into the chat as well. Okay, so these are the ELPS standards. We have also life and work competencies that you can find on that document. And here I just kind of brainstorm some example activities of how we can align and leverage students' funds of knowledge with these standards and with these competencies, okay? So the English Language Proficiency Standard 1, construct meaning from oral presentations and text. This kind of aligns here with community. If we can discuss with learners, listen and read text and discuss communication styles across cultures, right? So how can they leverage communication styles, and how might they differ between their native language and the target language, in this case being English, as well as have that discussion amongst themselves in class. ELPS Standard 2, exchanges of information, ideas, and analyses responding to peer, audience, or reader comments and questions. This can be aligned with life and work competencies of employment. And an example activity can be discuss different ways to search employment opportunities, as well as to develop and promote skills, right? The next one here, speak and write about complex literary and informational texts and topics. Well, this can align with life and work competencies of communication. And this can be to blog, journal about experiences, challenges, and goals, right, in the local community, as well as how they might be able to address, right, some of these experiences, challenges, leverage their experiences to address some of their challenges and goals. And I'll do one more here, construct oral and written claims and support them with reasoning and evidence. This can be aligned with the life and work competencies of consumer economics. You know, prepare an email requesting a service, for example, a refund, purchase, additional information. Again, basing the language and the activities in the real world, students' needs and ways that they can, you know, leverage kind of what maybe their experience with this, and maybe if they're inexperienced, maybe someone else, right, in the class has experience in a certain area that they can leverage and that they can share with other students in the classroom. I see this all the time where, you know, talking about just consumer economics, there's always that accountant, there's always that person who knows what they're doing with budgeting, and they can be such a great teacher as far as applying their funds of knowledge, their expertise towards the activity that can help everybody else in the course. So I won't go through all of these. It's here for you. You can do kind of engage in the same activity with aligning, these ELPS standards with the life and work competencies, and thinking of activities, again, that are based in students' needs, right? As well as how to, leverage their funds of knowledge, their experiences, their gifts, right, to achieving language competency, as well as, academic and professional skills. Okay. All right, everybody. So we are coming to the end here. I just want to leave a couple of minutes for questions. Feel free to post questions either in the chat or the Q&A. I can look at both of them. Just while you're doing that, I see that. Let's see here. Oh, Philip, let me just read this from Phil. Phil says, tongue plasticity is possible too. When teaching certain sounds that are difficult for students, we researched what the exact sound was and where to place the tongue in the mouth, the lips to capture that sound. Alas, I personally have yet to be able to pronounce the number 8 in French. Yeah, all right. It gives my wife and children great pleasure to tease me about it. Thank you, Phil, for sharing that. And I think that's a very important aspect of language as well, is that, it's not about perfection. There is no such thing as perfection in language. We all make beautiful mistakes, and we should all be open to learning, and we should all have empathy for each other, right, in that regard, to understand that we're all learning and that we're all here to support each other in our process of lifelong learning. Okay, so with that, June, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Ramin. That was fantastic. Right now, you see a feedback survey that is up on your screen right now. Please take just a minute to answer these short questions. We really value your feedback. It's really important for us to know how relevant this webinar was to you. And as you do that, I'm going to remind you that Tuesday, on our next webinar, it's going to be teaching, reading, vocabulary, speed, and comprehension. I hope that you can join us next week, and wish all of you a very great afternoon and evening for some of you. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you so much, Ramin.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for sharing your feedback. Please stay connected with IPDE and with me personally. Look forward to collaborating with all of you in the future. Thank you.